guess it's just me again. So I want to just start by saying thanks so much for having me. Such a talented congregation. I love hearing some live music on a Sunday morning. So my name is Jessie Fortuna, and I was here a couple of years ago, actually. I spoke on my work in child advocacy and my experience as being the CASA for Kids program director at YWCA La Crosse. I was at YWCA La Crosse for 14 years. My last day was actually December 31st, just a few weeks ago. So I feel like this is just this new beginning that I'm kind of embarking on, and I'm so excited to share about that. So the last time I was here, I spoke about just our broken child welfare system, all of the things that families and children that are involved in child welfare go through. And, when we're working with children who've been abused and or neglected, that original trauma is so deep, but also being removed from their home is equally or sometimes even classified as more traumatic as the original trauma that they suffered. I shared that children on average move within the child welfare system at least 3 times, and that only compounds the trauma that they've originally suffered. This seems very upside down. So, as a person who walks alongside these children and families, and as someone who trains advocates to kind of stand with children going through these difficult things, and learning so much about childhood trauma and the effects that trauma has on a developing brain, I shared all of that the last time I spoke. But I did not share on how I could manage to kind of stay in that arena and not allow that secondary trauma to affect me in my own home life, at least the best to my ability. And that is where my journey of knowing and practicing the philosophies and movements of yoga kind of step in. And that is what I'm here to talk to you about today. Now, anytime I talk about yoga, I like to make some like public service announcements that yoga is an ancient practice that has been practiced for thousands of years from the people and places of Southeast Asia, and from what we're recently learning, even parts of Northern Africa. These are not my people. These are not my ancestral people, and yet I am greatly benefiting from all of their philosophies and teachings. I am by no means an expert of all things yoga. I am, however, an expert on my own experiences looking through the lens of yoga and how it has personally affected what I do. And so that is what I can share today. Going back a little bit about how this all began, in 2009, or excuse me, in the early 2000s, I graduated in social work, and my first job was in Michigan, where I was living. I was a homeless and runaway youth case manager over a 5-county radius, and 3 of those counties were some of the lowest economic status, recognized as the lowest economic status counties in all of Michigan, and the most rural. So I put on a lot of miles. I put on 42,000 miles on my little car the first year that I worked there. And back then, if you remember, we would have to print out MapQuest directions, and you'd have your MapQuest directions in one hand and hand on the steering wheel. And my cell reception never was good out there. And I have one memory that really sticks out, that I was on a dirt road, not a gravel road, not a paved road, a dirt road. And I felt very lost. I saw a man on a tractor and decided to ask him for directions. And I thought his response was going to be something like, "Get off of my property. What are you doing out here?" And he said, "Oh no, just keep going on the dirt road. You're almost there to the home I was trying to make a visit at." And I had one of those moments like, what am I doing with my life? Like, how is this happening? But in that experience, it really laid down the ground work for my career in social work. It was a very eye-opening experience. Some of the days I would need to call child protection, the authorities, and animal control all in one day. And so I worked there for a few years, and then it was time to come home. This was where I grew up as a small child and still considered it home. And so in 2009, January, I started working at YWCA La Crosse. At first, I was hired to run their Bridges program. It was an after-school program for at-risk teen girls. I also, so in January, I moved home, started doing that. In March, I was invited to my first yoga class. And it quickly became the thing, the tool, the philosophy that I needed to be able to continue to do that difficult work of opening yourself up to folks, to families that are going through the roughest times of their life, and walk alongside of them while they're doing that difficult work. So fast forward, so I've at YWCA, I'm taking yoga classes. I started doing teacher training, worked through some of those things up to my 500 hour and plus. And I also was always involved with the Child Abuse Prevention Task Force. This is a task force that Nicole Milren, one of our beloved local therapists, was involved with. Actually, she started it 25 years ago. And Nicole, sometimes she knew that I practiced yoga, and sometimes I would bring in elements of yoga into the task force. I would do children's yoga at some of our events. I invited some of our social workers and my CASA volunteers, who are our child advocates, to free yoga classes. I tried to infuse it into our CASA trainings as much as possible, because I knew that yoga helps to put a pause in between when there's something that happens in action into our reaction. And we all need that. We all need to kind of train our brains to come off the superhighway and to have that one little moment of just a pause before we choose our reactions. And in 2019, so I'm doing this for 10 years, I think I'm pretty good at it. 2019, Nicole Milren says, it's wonderful, Jessie, that you have these tools in your toolbox and that you're offering them in some capacity. But when are you going to offer them to the children that we work with, to the children and families that we work with? And I remember just taking pause, like, I'm not really sure what you mean by that. I'm not really sure how to do that. And she enlightened me and said, why don't you take yoga and become a CCS vendor through the La Crosse County. Now, I have worked with CCS for many years. CCS stands for Comprehensive Community Services. If someone, a child or an adult, has some sort of mental health and or substance abuse issue, they could possibly qualify for CCS services. This opens them up to an array of different services that can be covered for by Badger Care, Medicaid, Medicare, which is wonderful. And luckily, La Crosse County is progressive enough in their thinking that they allow lots of non-traditional forms of therapy to be CCS vendors. So when somebody has that, there we have equestrine therapy. Kids and families can go out and pet and care for horses. We have play therapists available. We have canine skills building. We can work with dogs and learn new skills. And that is the avenue that I took. So I became a trauma sensitive yoga vendor for this program. Now that was in 2019. I was very excited. I had my first 3 clients who I was seeing every week. It was very manageable to continue to be the CASA for Kids program director and teach at Root Down Yoga, where I've taught for over 10 years. And then the pandemic hit and everything shut down. And I worked from home for 18 months with my 5-year-old child, or 4-year-old at the time. Root Down shut down. Case managers stopped doing home visits for over a year unless it was an emergency situation. And in 2021, the world started kind of opening back up. And I was about to ask Root Down if I could bring it back because I was really seeing some awesome results. I was getting to work with the same families that I was in the child welfare system, but being able to bring them this awesome tool that was working for me and so many others. And Nicole Milren has this way, if you know her, of just being in the right time at the right place. And she told me at that time that her and her wife, Nancy Pullman, who's been a supervisor at La Crosse County for many years, that they had decided to open up Brave Spaces Counseling and Wellness. As talk therapists, they realized after many years of service that talk therapy is one piece of the healing puzzle for many people. And sometimes people aren't ready for talk therapy, and it takes some of the non-traditional forms of therapy to kind of get their brain in a place to be able to talk about those hard things. And a lot of times it's wonderful to have it simultaneously so that you are having these kind of soft landing places so that you're maybe increasing your ability to be in those difficult conversations with your therapist. So they wanted to create Brave Spaces. Again, they have canine skills building, they have play therapy, they have art therapist, and they have myself. And so this was very exciting news to me. And in 2021, in June of 2021, we opened, and I went from my 3 clients to over 20 clients, and you see them weekly. So that was a full time for me. I love being a child advocate. I love working for YWCA La Crosse. I love their mission of empowering women and eliminating racism. But sometimes you have too many good things in your life and they still feel like spinning plates. And so I had to put one of those spinning plates down. And so I started taking hours, and YWCA is so gracious with me. I started up, from 40 hours. I tried 35 hours just to see how that felt, then to 30 hours, then to 20, and I saw out the year with 20 hours. Now, we've come a long way of understanding trauma and the effects of trauma has on especially our developing brains of our young people. And I just told the story to an intern of mine last semester that over 10 years ago when I started in the CASA program, we had a trifold brochure that listed the trauma-informed therapists in our La Crosse area so that we could make those recommendations to the families that we were working with. That blew her mind. She was like, a list? Like all therapists now are trauma informed in some way. And so the fact that it's come so far is really hopeful. We've learned in the last just few years, with the research has backed up that, trauma severs the mind-body connection. People who have suffered acute or chronic trauma often can lose feeling in their bodies because their bodies are in this place of trying to protect them. They don't want to feel, they don't want to have these very real mindful moments because that's scary and hard. And so moving forward, the research has just been so exciting in the last couple of years to show that yoga is one of the best ways to reconnect the mind-body connection. And it's not anything difficult either. I mean, these are very little movements that we can do, building in more mindful moments throughout your day. Noticing a breath movement with a body movement is one of the easiest ways to reconnect and heal our brain. And so we know that children, especially when they're exposed to trauma at a young age, their percentages of the or statistics showing that they can be diagnosed with things that are very much trauma related and not necessarily the true diagnosis, but children can have, we work with kids that have ADHD and ADD and ODD and RAD and the list goes on. And not treated, those mental health conditions can turn into real physical ailments. If you've never watched the TED Talk from Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who then turned into the California Surgeon General, which is so amazing, she breaks down ACEs and childhood trauma just so beautifully. beautifully. I used to have every CASA volunteer watch that video. So I can list that out if you need it. But these can turn into real physical ailments, higher cancer rates, congenital heart disease, and the list goes on from there. And so it's important to heal our brains. And I could talk about this all day, and it looks like we're already running out of time, so I'm going to wrap her up here good. But I wanted to do a few of these movements with you. And so, in hopes that you can put them in your own bodies and perhaps share them with others. And then you know a little bit about trauma sensitive yoga. When people ask me, how does trauma sensitive yoga differ from regular yoga? The short answer is it doesn't really. It's still the same philosophy, it's still the same movements, but it breaks down all the barriers folks have to ever entering in a yoga class at a yoga studio. One, yoga is pricey. It costs money. I think of my own lovely Root Down Yoga studio, and right when you open the door, there's a huge flight of stairs up to the top. Stairs are difficult for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, and we don't know what's maybe at the top of those stairs. Classes are very busy. People don't always cover all parts of their bodies. These are all reasons why yoga would not, maybe that way of accessing yoga would not work for some folks. So I'm able to have people come in one-on-one to Brave Spaces or share it right into their homes. So I go into a lot of people's homes and meet them wherever they're at. And we start very, baby steps. And so we're going to do some baby step yoga right now. Again, I'm going to invite you to plant your feet on the ground. This just helps you to ground firmly. I hear this is your theme this month. Again, maybe just a little shoulder roll. Move your head around. Just notice where your head is in between your two shoulders. Notice where your hands are. We're going to reach up to the ceiling with a breath in. Use your whole in breath. And then as you exhale, I want you to take rain fingers, we like to call them, or snow fingers, given the day, all the way down. We're going to do it 2 more times. Breathe and reach up. Notice your whole in breath. Rain down on your exhale. Last time, reach all the way up with a big breath in. Trickle your fingers back down to your lap and just notice that nice kind of relaxation feeling in your arms after you've chosen to use muscle groups and then have let them be still. Next, I want you to take your arms out to the sides. Maybe you can see me better. Palms facing up. Notice how when you open your palms to the ceiling, it kind of opens your shoulders a little bit more versus closed. I want you to bring your arms up overhead and gently touch. Exhale, bringing your arms all the way down and through. Do it 2 more times. Big breath in, touch, and slowly come down. 1 more time, all the way up. Feel that connection and bring them down. Let your arms rest in your lap. Notice that little kind of almost like a whoosh feeling, a little tingle of being still after movement. Now, I would love to lead you in a full hour yoga class, but we don't have time for that. I think, is it time for a little opening of discussion? Questions? Yes?